The throne room of the Scifi Empire was silent. It was a massive chamber, built from dark metal and glowing with eerie blue lights. Tall pillars stretched to the ceiling, and banners of the empire hung from the walls. At the center, on a high throne, sat Queen Velzura, ruler of the Scifi. Her golden eyes stared at the council gathered before her. They were the strongest and most intelligent of her kind. Generals, scientists, and advisors stood in a half-circle, their expressions serious. They all knew why they were here. The Scifi race was dying. For centuries, their species had ruled over dozens of star systems. They were known for their strength, intelligence, and unmatched technology. But now, their greatest weapon, their own genetics, had become their weakness. The Scifi were unable to produce strong offspring anymore. Each new generation was weaker than the last. Their bodies were failing, their minds becoming dull. No matter how advanced their technology, they could not stop this slow death. The Queen's voice echoed through the chamber. "We need a solution." One of the scientists, an old Scifi with silver skin, stepped forward. "We have tried everything, my queen. Genetic repairs, cloning, even artificial enhancements. Nothing works." A general in black armor crossed his arms. "Then we must take new worlds and find stronger warriors among the conquered." Velzura's eyes narrowed. "Foolish. Our armies are already growing weaker. A war would only speed up our end." Silence followed. No one had an answer. Then, a deep voice broke the tension. "There is one final option." All eyes turned to High Scholar Zorven, the most brilliant mind of the Scifi. His robes were lined with symbols of ancient knowledge, and his long fingers tapped against a glowing datapad. "We must look beyond our own kind. We must bring in a human." A ripple of shock spread through the room. Humans, the young, chaotic race from the distant Sol system. Compared to the Scifi, they were primitive. Their technology was thousands of years behind. Their armies were small. They were nothing special. Yet, they were survivors. Unlike the Scifi, humans had adapted to countless environments. They had evolved rapidly, always changing, always pushing forward. Their genetic code was unstable, but that instability was also their greatest strength. The Queen leaned forward, her golden eyes locked onto Zorven. "You suggest we mix our bloodline with a lesser species." Zorven did not flinch. "I suggest we embrace survival." Murmurs spread through the council. Some were disgusted. Others were intrigued. The Queen considered the idea. If humans truly held the key to evolution, then perhaps, just perhaps, they could save the Empire. "And where do we find such a human?" she asked. Zorven smiled. "There is one who is perfect for this task." A hologram flickered to life in the air, displaying an image of a man. Dr. Adrian Cross, a human scientist, a geneticist, an exobiologist. He had studied alien life across the galaxy, searching for the secrets of evolution. He was brilliant, daring, and most importantly, unpredictable. "He is the best in his field," Zorven continued. "If anyone can help us, it is him." The Queen's gaze lingered on the hologram. The man looked ordinary by Scifi standards, shorter, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes. A mere human, yet something in his expression spoke of intelligence, of curiosity, of a mind that sought answers where others saw only barriers. "Bring him to me." The council stirred. Some whispered their objections, but no one dared to challenge the Queen's command. The decision was made. Dr. Adrian Cross would be brought to the Scifi Empire. Whether by invitation or by force, he would come. And when he did, the future of an entire species would rest in his hands. Dr. Adrian Cross adjusted his glasses as he stared at the holographic data in front of him. The small laboratory on Lunar Research Station hummed softly, the artificial lights casting a dim glow over his desk. Stacks of reports, genetic samples, and research modules cluttered his workspace, but he didn't mind. He had spent years studying alien genetics, searching for answers to evolution's greatest mysteries. Why did some species thrive while others faded? Why did humans, against all odds, survive where stronger, smarter species had perished? The questions drove him, kept him awake at night, pushing him further into the unknown. Tonight, however, he felt exhausted. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Maybe I need a break," he muttered to himself. Then the lights flickered. A strange hum filled the air, deep and unnatural. Adrian frowned. Power fluctuations weren't common on the research station. He turned towards the door, just as a blinding blue light engulfed the room. A sharp pull, like being yanked through space itself, filled his senses. His vision blurred, his breath caught in his throat. Then, darkness. Adrian awoke on cold metal. The scent of something sterile filled his lungs. His head pounded as he pushed himself up, blinking rapidly. He wasn't in his lab anymore. He was in a massive chamber, its walls lined with glowing alien symbols. The ceiling stretched high, made of smooth, dark metal that pulsed with an eerie blue energy. Strange, curved technology surrounded him. Machines that hummed with power, their purpose unknown. His heart pounded. He had been abducted. A sound echoed through the chamber. Footsteps. Adrian turned, his breath catching as figures emerged from the shadows. They were tall, their skin a mixture of silver and deep violet. Their eyes glowed golden, their movements graceful yet powerful. Their armor was sleek, their robes woven with symbols that pulsed with faint energy. At the center of them all stood her, Queen Velzira. Even without an introduction, Adrian knew she was in charge. Her presence demanded attention, her golden eyes sharp and intelligent. A long flowing robe covered her powerful form, edged with a metallic material that shimmered under the dim light. Adrian forced himself to remain calm. He had encountered aliens before, but never like this. Never had he been taken against his will. "Human." Velzira spoke, her voice smooth yet commanding. "Do you know why you are here?" Adrian exhaled, gathering his thoughts. "Stay calm. Don't show fear." "No," he said, keeping his voice steady. "But I'd really like to know." The Queen studied him for a moment before gesturing with a hand. A holographic projection flared to life between them. An image of Scifi DNA, its once perfect structure now breaking apart. "Our species is dying," Velzira stated. "Our genetic code has reached its limit. We can no longer evolve." Adrian frowned, stepping closer to the projection. He analyzed the data, his mind racing. He had seen genetic decay before, but never on this scale. It was as if their entire species had been trapped. "And you think I can fix this?" he asked. Velzira's gaze sharpened. "You are the most brilliant human geneticist. You have studied evolution more than anyone in your species. If anyone can find the answer, it is you." Adrian crossed his arms. "You could have just asked." A deep chuckle echoed from one of the armored Scifi warriors standing nearby. Clearly, they found his response amusing. Velzira, however, remained unreadable. "Would you have come willingly?" she asked. Adrian hesitated. The truth was, probably not. But he didn't like being forced into anything. He sighed, looking back at the projection. "I don't know if I can help, but I can tell you this. Your DNA isn't just failing. It looks artificial." Velzira's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Adrian pointed at the holographic strands. "There are patterns here that don't occur naturally. This looks designed." He turned to her. "Has your species ever experimented with genetic modification in the past?" The Queen remained silent. Around the chamber, the Scifi exchanged uncertain glances. Adrian's gut tightened. They don't know. Or worse, someone erased their history. His mind raced. If their DNA had been altered in the distant past, that meant their current crisis wasn't a natural evolution problem. It was a built-in limit. Someone, or something, had done this to them. And that changed everything. Adrian turned back to the Queen, his confidence growing. If I'm going to help, I need full access to your genetic archives. I need to study your history, every experiment, every modification ever recorded. Velzura considered him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Very well, human. She stepped closer, her golden eyes locking onto his. But understand this, if you fail, our empire falls. Adrian exhaled slowly. No pressure, right? He glanced at the projection again, his mind already forming 100 theories. He wasn't just solving a scientific puzzle anymore. He was unraveling a mystery that could change an entire species. And deep down, a small, terrifying thought crept into his mind. What if the Xeltheri weren't the only ones who had been altered? Dr. Adrian Cross stood inside the Xeltheri Royal Archives, staring at the endless rows of glowing data cubes. The room was massive, its walls stretching high, covered in symbols that pulse with ancient energy. The air was cold, sterile, and heavy with silence. Two Xeltheri scientists, their silver-blue skin reflecting the dim lights, stood beside him. They watched him carefully, as if unsure whether a mere human should be allowed near such knowledge. Adrian barely noticed. His mind was already racing. For the past several hours, he had been studying thousands of years of Xeltheri genetic history. What he found shocked him. At first, the Xeltheri evolution seemed normal. Rapid advancements, natural selection, genetic improvements. But then, around 10,000 years ago, everything stopped. Their genetic structure had become fixed, like a machine locked in place. No mutations, no natural evolution, no genetic drift. It was as if someone had programmed their DNA to remain unchanged forever. That was impossible. No species in the universe evolved this way, unless someone had interfered. Adrian exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening around the glowing tablet in his hands. This wasn't just a genetic failure. This was a cage. Something's wrong, he muttered. One of the Xeltheri scientists, Varric, frowned. What do you mean, human? Adrian turned the tablet toward them, highlighting the strange, repetitive patterns in their DNA. Your species isn't dying naturally. Something, locked your evolution a long time ago. The other scientist, Heir, looked disturbed. That is not possible. We are the strongest species in the known galaxy. No one could have done this to us. Adrian shook his head. Strength has nothing to do with it. Whoever did this wasn't trying to kill you. He looked at them seriously. They were trying to control you. Silence filled the archive chamber. Varric and Heir exchanged uneasy glances. No Xeltheri had ever considered such a possibility. Their pride, their history, their very identity was built on the belief that they were the pinnacle of evolution. But what if they weren't? What if they were just a failed experiment? Adrian took a deep breath. No time for hesitation. He turned back to the tablet, pulling up his own plan. Something risky, something no Xeltheri had ever considered. Hybridization. If their DNA was locked, the only way to break the chain was to introduce something new, something adaptable, something human. Human DNA. The idea was insane. Mixing human and Xeltheri genes. It had never been done before. It might not even work. But Adrian had one advantage. He was human, and humans had survived the impossible before. He turned to the scientists. I need access to your cloning labs. If I can mix human DNA with Xeltheri genetics, I might be able to restart your evolution. Heir looked horrified. You want to taint our bloodline. Adrian folded his arms. Your pure bloodline is dying. You don't have a choice. Varric hesitated, then spoke carefully. The Queen must decide. The Queen's choice. Queen Velzura sat on her throne, her golden eyes unreadable as Adrian explained his theory. Around them, her advisors listened in silence. Some looked disgusted, others intrigued. When Adrian finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Velzura finally spoke. You suggest merging our bloodline with human genetics. Adrian nodded. It's the only way. A general in dark armor growled. This is blasphemy. We are the greatest species in the galaxy. To mix with a lesser race. Enough. Velzyra's voice was sharp. The general fell silent. She turned to Adrian. What are the risks? Adrian exhaled. Everything. It could fail. It could create unstable mutations. Or it could work. He took a step forward. And if it works, your people won't just survive. They'll evolve beyond anything you've ever imagined. Velzyra studied him. She saw something in his eyes. Determination, confidence, a refusal to accept defeat. For centuries, that Exceltheri had believed in their genetic superiority. But where had that belief led them? To stagnation, decay, extinction. Perhaps it was time for something new. Something human. Finally, the Queen nodded. Begin the experiment. The first hybrid. The Exceltheri genetic spire was a towering structure of glowing energy, filled with machinery older than any living memory. Inside, Adrian and a team of Exceltheri scientists worked tirelessly, running simulations, modifying genetic codes, and preparing the first test. A single embryo. Half Exceltheri, half human. Adrian's heart pounded as he watched the process unfold. The embryo was growing faster than expected. The genetic barriers that had locked the Exceltheri for centuries were breaking. The data screens flashed. Unprecedented neural activity detected. The embryo was adapting at an unnatural speed. Kalir gasped. This is impossible. Adrian whispered under his breath, staring at the screen. No, this is evolution. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Exceltheri had changed. But not everyone saw this as a victory. Deep in the palace corridors, hidden from sight, whispers of rebellion grew louder. The noble houses, the old bloodlines, the warriors who believed in the purity of their race. They would never accept this, and they would do anything to stop it. Dr. Adrian Cross watched in awe as the embryo continued to grow within the glowing containment pod. The hybrid, a fusion of Exceltheri and human DNA, was evolving at an incredible rate. Neural activity surged through its developing brain, far exceeding what he had seen in either species before. This is it, Adrian murmured, staring at the data screen. The first true evolution in 10,000 years. Beside him, Varric and Kalir, the two Exceltheri scientists assisting him, were speechless. Their entire civilization had been stuck in genetic stagnation for millennia. But now, Adrian's experiment was proving that change was possible. A new future for the Exceltheri Empire had begun. But outside the laboratory, not everyone saw it that way. The hidden threat. In the darkened halls of the royal spire, a secret meeting was taking place. A group of high-ranking Exceltheri nobles and generals had gathered in silence. Their faces were cold, their expressions grim. These were the traditionalists, the ones who still believed in the purity of their species. And they saw Adrian's experiment as an abomination. The Queen has betrayed our ancestors, one noble growled. Another slammed his fist against the table. A human. A lesser being dares to change our bloodline. General Vector, one of the most powerful military leaders in the Empire, stepped forward. His golden eyes burned with anger. We cannot allow this experiment to continue. If we do, we will cease to be Exceltheri. The others murmured in agreement. Then we must act, one of the elders declared. The Queen must be stopped. The human must be eliminated. And the hybrid must be destroyed. A deadly silence filled the room. Then Vector nodded. Prepare the warriors. Tonight, we take back our empire. The attack on the genetic spire. Adrian was still studying the hybrid's rapid development when the alarms began to blare. Red warning lights flashed across the lab. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the speakers. Security breach detected. Unidentified hostile forces approaching. Adrian's heart pounded. Hostile forces. Varric's face darkened. They've come for the experiment. Keller's hands trembled over the control panel. We must protect it. If they destroy the hybrid, all hope is lost. Before Adrian could respond, a thunderous explosion shook the entire facility. The walls trembled. The lights flickered. Outside the lab, the sound of weapons fire and clashing metal filled the air. The rebellion had begun. "We need to get out of here," Adrian shouted. Varric nodded. "Follow me. There is a hidden escape route beneath the lab." But Keller hesitated. "We can't leave the hybrid." Adrian turned back to the containment pod. The small being inside floated peacefully, unaware of the chaos unfolding outside. He made a decision. "We're taking it with us." Escape through the shadows. Adrian and the scientists hurriedly detached the pod from the main system, placing it into a portable stasis unit. It was large, but light enough to carry. Then they ran. The corridors of the genetic spire were filled with smoke and fire. Exeltheri warriors in dark armor stormed the facility, weapons drawn, cutting down the Queen's loyal guards. It was a civil war. Adrian's lungs burned as they sprinted through the chaos. The sound of battle was everywhere. Shouts, energy blasts, metal clashing against metal. The rebellion was ruthless, their forces overwhelming the loyalists. As they neared the hidden passage, a squad of enemy soldiers spotted them. "There they are. Stop the human." Adrian barely had time to react before Varric shoved him aside, raising his weapon and opening fire. Blue energy bolts shot through the air, striking the enemy soldiers, but they returned fire just as fast. Keller screamed as one of the rebels lunged forward, a glowing blade aimed at Adrian's chest. Adrian ducked at the last second, the weapon slicing through the air just above his head. He grabbed a nearby metal rod and then swung it with all his strength, knocking the attacker back. Varric killed the last soldier, breathing heavily. "Move. More will come." They ran again, finally reaching the hidden exit. Varric pressed his hand against the wall, activating an ancient mechanism. A small hatch slid open, revealing a dark tunnel leading into the underground. They were safe. For now. The Queen's last stand. Back in the royal spire, Queen Velzura stood tall, her golden eyes blazing with fury. Her throne room was under siege. General Vector stood before her, his sword dripping with the blood of her royal guards. "Your reign is over, my queen." Velzura clenched her fists. "You are a fool, Vector. You think by killing me, you will save our empire. You will only ensure its destruction." Vector sneered. "We will rebuild, without the humans' corruption." Velzura took a deep breath. She knew she could not win this fight, but she could still buy time. Raising her hand, she activated the emergency override on her throne. A powerful energy shield surrounded her, forcing Vector to step back. At the same time, a secret transmission was sent out to Adrian. Her voice came through the hidden communicator. "Human, you must protect the hybrid. No matter what happens to me, it is the key to our survival." Adrian, now deep in the underground tunnels, heard her words. His grip tightened around the stasis unit. He would not fail. But as the transmission ended, the last thing he heard was the sound of Vector's blade striking against the Queen's shield. And then, silence. The underground tunnels were cold, dark, and filled with the distant echoes of war. Dr. Adrian Cross moved quickly, carrying the stasis unit containing the hybrid embryo. His heart pounded in his chest. Behind him, Varric and Keller followed closely, their eyes scanning for danger. Their once great empire was now a battlefield, torn apart by civil war. A few hours ago, Queen Velzura had sent her final message. "Protect the hybrid. No matter what happens to me, it is the key to our survival." And then, silence. Adrian didn't know if the Queen was still alive. He didn't have time to find out. Right now, the most important thing was keeping the hybrid safe, because if the rebels caught them, everything would be lost. A dangerous escape. The tunnel stretched for miles beneath the city, ancient pathways built long before even the Queen's time. Some of them had collapsed, while others were filled with toxic gases. The air was stale, and every step echoed loudly in the silence. Heir glanced at Adrian. How much longer until we reach the extraction point? Adrian checked the small holomap on his wrist. Another 2 miles. If we keep moving, we should be out before sunrise. Varric nodded. Then let's. A loud metallic clang echoed through the tunnel. They froze. Footsteps. Heavy, armored footsteps. Varric cursed. They found us. Adrian's mind raced. The rebels were tracking them. Maybe they had heat sensors. Maybe they had spies. It didn't matter. They had to run. The chase. Adrian tightened his grip on the stasis unit and sprinted forward. His legs burned, his lungs screamed for air, but he didn't stop. Failure was not an option. Behind him, the rebels were gaining. Their footsteps grew louder, their voices echoing through the tunnels. There, don't let them escape. A bright energy bolt shot past Adrian's head, slamming into the tunnel wall. Sparks exploded, raining down like fire. Heir fired back with her plasma pistol, forcing the rebels to slow down. Go. I'll cover you. No. Adrian grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. We stay together. They turned a corner, only to find a dead end. Varric growled in frustration. We're trapped. Adrian's mind raced. Think, think, think. There had to be a way out. Then he saw it. A maintenance shaft high up on the wall. It was small, barely big enough for a person to crawl through. There. We climb. Varric nodded and cupped his hands. Go. I'll lift you. Adrian climbed up first, shoving the stasis unit into the shaft. He pulled himself up, then helped Heir. Varric was about to follow when the rebels stormed into the tunnel. Stop them. A soldier raised his weapon and fired. The plasma blast hit Varric in the shoulder. He grunted in pain but still pushed himself up, his body trembling. Adrian grabbed his arm and pulled with all his strength. For a moment, it felt like they weren't going to make it. Then, Varric collapsed into the shaft, breathing heavily. They were safe, for now. A moment of truth. The tunnel shaft led them farther underground, deep into the forgotten ruins of an ancient Sci-Fi city. They stopped to rest inside an old, abandoned chamber. The walls were covered in glowing symbols, remnants of a past civilization. Adrian checked on the hybrid embryo. It was still stable, its heartbeat strong. Heir sighed in relief. We made it, but barely. Varric winced, clutching his wounded shoulder. They won't stop. They'll keep hunting us. Adrian nodded. Then we have to move fast. Heir looked at him seriously. Adrian, what if we fail? What if the hybrid isn't enough to save us? Adrian met her gaze. Then we fight. We fight because we have to. Because if we give up now, everything dies. Varric grunted. Then let's keep moving. Meanwhile, at the royal spire, in the throne room, General Vector stood over Queen Velzira, his blade glowing with energy. The queen was injured, blood staining her royal armor. But she still refused to bow. You will never win, she spat. You may kill me, but you cannot stop what has already begun. Vector smirked. You place too much hope in that human. He will fail. And when he does, your new Sci-Fi will die with him. The queen's eyes burned with fury. Then you do not understand humans at all. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the palace. Vector turned sharply as a soldier ran in. Sir, there's been a breach. The loyalists are fighting back. Velzira smirked. Looks like your war isn't over yet. Vector growled. Find the hybrid. Kill the human. End this now. The underground ruins stretched endlessly before them, the air thick with dust and the whispers of a long-dead civilization. Adrian Cross, carrying the stasis unit holding the hybrid embryo, moved cautiously. Varric and Heir followed closely behind, their weapons drawn. The tunnels had bought them time, but the rebels wouldn't stop hunting them. They had to keep moving. A desperate plan. Adrian checked his holomap again. We're close. The extraction point is just ahead. Varric grunted, still holding his injured shoulder. Let's hope it's still secure. Heir frowned. What if it's a trap? The rebels could be waiting for us. Adrian exhaled. She was right. Vector and his rebels had too many resources. They would have guessed their escape route by now. But they had no choice. We'll have to take the risk, Adrian said. The Queen trusted us. We can't let her down. Varric nodded. Then we move fast. The betrayal. The ruins opened up into a large cavern, where an old Scifi transport pod sat in the middle, its engines powered down. This was their escape. Adrian sighed in relief, until he saw the figures standing nearby. A squad of rebel soldiers. At their center stood a familiar face, General Vector. He smirked. You really thought you could escape. Adrian tightened his grip on the stasis unit. Let us go, Vector. Varric stepped forward, his claws flexing. This hybrid is the future of our people. Killing it would destroy everything. Vector laughed coldly. You sound like the Queen. His eyes narrowed. But her reign is over. And your human experiment ends now. He raised his hand, and his soldiers opened fire. The last fight. Adrian dove behind a fallen pillar as plasma bolts filled the cavern. Explosions rocked the ground, sending dust and rubble flying. Varric charged forward, his energy blade clashing against a rebel's weapon. Sparks flew, the sound of metal on metal ringing through the air. Heir fired back, taking down 2 soldiers with well-placed shots. She was fast, but there were too many of them. Adrian's mind raced. They couldn't win a fight like this. They needed a way out. Then, he saw it. The transport pod's controls were still active. If he could reach them, he could activate the ship's defense systems. But he had to move fast. A dangerous gamble. Adrian took a deep breath and ran. Blaster fire whizzed past him, narrowly missing his head. His hand shook as he reached the control panel. Hurry, hurry. He tapped the interface, searching for the ship's defense protocols. Behind him, Varric roared in pain as a rebel's blade sliced across his leg. Heir screamed, her energy shield flickering as she tried to hold back 2 soldiers at once. Vector walked forward slowly, confident. It's over, human. Adrian ignored him. His fingers flew across the controls. Access granted. Activating defense mode. The transport's hidden auto turrets sprang to life, swiveling toward the rebels. A split second later, they fired. The turning point. The rebels never saw it coming. The turrets unleashed a storm of plasma fire, cutting down Vector's soldiers in seconds. The cavern shook as the last of the rebels fell. Smoke and fire filled the air. Silence. Varric groaned, pushing himself up. You actually did it. Heir coughed, wiping dust from her face. That was close. Adrian turned to Vector, who lay injured but alive. The rebel general glared at him. You think this changes anything? Adrian met his gaze. You've already lost, Vector. Vector laughed bitterly. You don't understand. The Queen, she's dead. Adrian froze. What? Vector's smirk widened. She fought hard, but in the end she fell. Your hybrid has no throne to return to. A heavy silence fell over them. Heir whispered, then, it's over. Adrian clenched his fists. No, it wasn't. A new beginning. Adrian lifted the stasis unit, looking at the small hybrid inside. This wasn't about the Queen anymore. It wasn't even about the war. This was about the future. We leave, Adrian said firmly. We find a new place, a new home. Varric and Kaller exchanged glances. Then they both nodded. Adrian turned back to Vector. Your way is over. The old empire is dead. But we will build something better. Vector laughed weakly. Then go, human. But know this. No matter where you run, the past will always follow. Adrian didn't answer. He just stepped onto the transport pod, the others following behind. The engines roared to life. The ship rose, dust swirling around them. And as they flew into the vast, endless sky, the new era of the Sci-Fi began. The transport pod soared through the dark void of space, leaving behind the ruined Sci-Fi homeworld. The battle was over, but the war was far from finished. Inside the ship, Adrian Cross sat in the cockpit, staring at the vast expanse ahead. The stars stretched endlessly, cold and indifferent. The only thing keeping him grounded was the stasis unit beside him. The hybrid embryo, the last hope of the Sci-Fi race. Queen Velzira was gone. The rebels had torn apart the empire, and now Adrian and his small group were all that remained of the Queen's vision. They had to build something new. A moment of grief. Varric and Kaller stood behind Adrian, their expressions grim. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on them. Kaller was the first to speak. Where do we go now? Adrian exhaled slowly. Somewhere safe. Somewhere we can rebuild. Varric clenched his fists. The Queen is dead. The Empire is lost. Even if the hybrid survives, we have no army, no allies. Adrian turned to him, his eyes firm. Then we start from nothing. Varric growled. And what if Vector was right? What if the past always follows us? Adrian's jaw tightened. Then we don't run. We fight. We build something better. We make sure this hybrid isn't just a symbol of the past, but the beginning of the future. Kaller looked at the stasis unit, her expression softening. The Queen believed in you, Adrian. Maybe we should too. For the first time since the battle, a small flicker of hope ignited in Adrian's chest. A dangerous decision. The ship's computer beeped, breaking the silence. Incoming transmission. Adrian frowned and opened the channel. A holographic image appeared. A Sci-Fi warrior in battered armor. This is Commander Jolan. If you are receiving this, then you are not alone. Loyalists still fight. We have gathered on the moon of Varios, but we are barely holding on. The message flickered. Vector's forces hunt us. If we fall, the last of the Queen's supporters will be gone. We need help. The transmission cut out. Silence filled the cockpit. Kaller's eyes widened. There are survivors. Varric crossed his arms. And they are about to die unless we do something. Adrian clenched his fists. If they ignored this call, the last of the Loyalists would be wiped out. But if they went back, they would be walking into another battle. Wounded, outnumbered, and with only one ship. He looked at the stasis unit. If the hybrid was truly the key to a new Sci-Fi civilization, then it needed protectors. It needed a home. Adrian made his choice. We go to Varios. Varric grinned. I was hoping you'd say that. Kaller smirked. Then let's finish what the Queen started. The final battle. The transport pod dropped out of hyperspace, arriving over the moon of Varios. Below them, a war raged. The last of the Queen's loyalists were pinned down in the ruins of an ancient outpost. Vector's forces surrounded them, their warships raining fire from above. Adrian's hands gripped the controls. We have to hit them fast. Varric grinned, flexing his claws. Then let's make some noise. Adrian dove the ship downward, dodging enemy fire. Kaller took control of the ship's cannons, blasting apart the rebel forces below. As the ship landed, Adrian grabbed his blaster rifle and sprinted out with Varric and Kaller. The battlefield was chaos. Loyalist warriors fought desperately, their energy blades clashing against the rebels. Adrian took cover behind a broken pillar, firing at the enemy. One by one, the rebels fell. Then, a deep, familiar voice echoed across the battlefield. "So, the human returns." Adrian turned. Standing in the middle of the battlefield was Vector, his massive blade glowing with energy. Adrian raised his weapon, but Vector moved too fast. The warlord was on him in seconds. The final duel. Adrian barely dodged the first strike, the energy blade slicing past his face. He stumbled back, raising his blaster. Vector kicked him hard, sending him flying. Pain exploded in Adrian's chest. Vector towered over him. "You should have run, human." Adrian wiped blood from his mouth. "I don't run." Vector *** swung again. ***, but this time, Adrian ducked and rolled. He grabbed a fallen warrior's energy blade and ignited it. The two clashed, human against Sci-Fi. Vector was stronger, but Adrian was faster. He dodged, weaving through attacks, waiting for an opening. And then, he found it. With a quick, precise strike, Adrian drove the blade into Vector's chest. The warlord staggered back, eyes wide with shock. He fell to his knees, his weapon dropping. Adrian stood over him. "Your war is over." Vector exhaled one final breath and collapsed. A new era. The rebels, seeing their leader fall, began to retreat. The battle was over. Adrian turned to the remaining loyalists, who now gathered before him. Commander Jolan stepped forward, his eyes filled with hope. "The Queen is gone, but the future is not lost." Adrian lifted the stasis unit, showing them the hybrid. "No, it isn't." The warriors knelt before him, pledging their loyalty. Varric grinned. "Looks like you're a leader now, human." Killer smirked. "Not bad for an outsider." Adrian took a deep breath. The empire of old was gone, but from its ashes, something new would rise. A future where Sci-Fi and humans stood together. A future worth fighting for. The story was just beginning.